Welcome to The Fair Fight, Personal Injury Law with Ann Thoeny.
Hey everybody, I'm Kevin Rosenquist. Today we're joined by Ann Thoeny, a Seattle-based personal injury lawyer with over 30 years of experience and a relentless focus on helping the vulnerable and injured seek fair compensation against large companies. Ann, so great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
So tell me a little about your own experience and background practicing personal injury law and specifically with slip and fall cases.
Yeah, so I've been practicing personal injury law both on the defense side and the plaintiff side for about 20 years. And yeah, I worked for an insurance defense firm for about 7 years. And then I came back to which I prefer, having my own personal clients on the plaintiff side. And what we call overall term premises liability involves slip and fall cases, trip and fall cases. And I love doing them because they are a little more challenging and I enjoy that.
Any specific reasons for going from the defense side to the plaintiff side?
Well, I had been a public defender for a long time, had a lot of trial experience, but wanted to get out of the criminal law field. And I knew that a lot of insurance companies were looking for trial attorneys. So it moved me over to, try that out. And that is all tort law. They're doing a lot of, motor vehicle accidents, some premises liability too. And that's what brought me over there. But I knew my heart really wasn't in that, but I really loved the actual area of law. And my heart wasn't in the sense that I prefer to have a one-person client as opposed to a corporation or insurance company. And so I just got my experience and training there for quite a few years and a number of trials. And then I said, well, it's time now. I'm going to leave and go start a practice and do what I really want to do is help injured people. So that's I kind of went back to what I felt like I was doing in the early part of my career.
You mentioned before that slip and fall cases are very challenging. What makes them more challenging than other personal injury cases?
Well, generally it's because, so in Washington state, we have what we call comparative law. Usually with a slip and fall, there's always some blame that they will attribute to the person who fell. Like you should have looked where you were going is just sort of a general catch-all term for what the defense will always raise. So some attorneys I know don't really like to do them at all because it can be challenging on liability. You have to look for the responsibility of the party, whether they were supposed to clear snow then or at that time, or whether they were supposed to design their parking lot in a certain way, not to have their curb stops in this, intrusive way, or whether you're not supposed to have a clean floor, for instance, in an airport hangar, a case I'm dealing with right now. And it can be difficult in terms of trying to figure out who has responsibility for that particular object or, product on the floor that caused this person to fall. It can be a bump in a sidewalk also. I've had, a person in a flower shop. They had quite a bump up on the floor when their eyes are all focused up above and they slipped and fell. There's always the defense. They always bring up the defense of, well, you also had a responsibility to look where you're going. When I say comparative fault, what I mean is there's 100% liability, and that can be 80% to the corporate or other entity and 20% to your client, or 50-50, or maybe the jury would find 100% fault with the corporate client or company or whoever you're pursuing for that claim. So for that reason, because liability is always going to be discounted some.
How do you determine the liability when it comes to these cases?
I myself feel like, well, this is your 100% responsibility. This corporate entity or company or whoever is responsible, who eventually determines it is the jury. So it's just an assessment of really all the facts in the case. So it's really very specifically fact driven. What time were you there? Why were you there? Where were you going? How long have they known of this problem, if it is a known problem? And before you actually file a case or get into litigation, you don't always have the answer to all of that. I will often get an expert, depending on the situation, prior to even filing the case or starting it, to make sure that, let's say, an expert, I've had an expert, a safety expert, we have those, somebody about trees and planting of trees, because a city plants trees and the sidewalk bumps up over here all the time, as you can see behind me. Lots and lots of trees in Seattle, a lot of uneven sidewalks. Yeah.
What are some common misconceptions people have about slip and fall accidents specifically?
I would say that a misconception is just that when I say, it's harder because of the public perception of these cases. They don't think of it in the same way they think that they were in a motorcycle, or not a motorcycle, but a motor vehicle accident, and somebody just ran the red light, things that seem obvious to them. A lot of people, unless they're the ones that fell and got injured to their surprise because something wasn't taken care of or wasn't expected, unless you're that person, I think many people, there's just a concept in the world of, you should be looking out for where you're going. There's usually some aspect of that idea that people have. I mean, I'm assuming that's when you talk to people, that's kind of the pushback you get.
Yeah. That's definitely what it is. That, or the fact that it's just, they're just looking for a payday.
Oh, well, yes. Yeah, yes. I mean, that's kind of true that I have to educate people about in all areas of personal injury, frankly.
Can you walk us through sort of the typical process of a slip and fall case, from the initial consultation to the resolution?
The initial consultation, somebody calls me. I've got somebody now that was a charter pilot, and slipped and fell in a hangar because they were walking through the hangar in the morning and the technicians are marching them outside to look at a plane that they had flown in. And there was a large product on the floor, water or jet fuel possibly, but there was something on the floor. And this is all this pilot knows. He falls on his back. He's hurt really bad. He goes to the hospital, and he's unable to finish that flight, and he's unable to fly for a while and gets medical care. So how does it start? They tell me this scenario, and the next thing I do is, try to find out as much about that particular hangar, go to the site myself, look around, try to get information about how it's supposed to operate, send out letters to a variety of people, trying to find an entity who might be responsible for that hangar. And in this particular case, it was kind of tricky because Boeing Airport has leases and they don't keep track of all their subleases and whatnot. So I had to do a public records request, and it took quite a bit of time to find a responsible entity. And that's just one case, and it just came to mind because I'm in it right now. But yeah, it usually involves some sort of an investigation of the area, as I said, and then slip and fall on the sidewalk. I'll get a safety expert. I'll get an arborist or tree expert in some cases that I can think of. So initially I listen to somebody, and if it really sounds like that is not something that should happen, I have a good sense of it. I know the law in Washington, and then I will okay, I'll take this on, and I start this investigation. And so it depends on the facts as to what I do. I've had, experts in when you're supposed to remove snow. So generally I rely a lot on people in a particular field to weigh in on these issues. Yeah.
So if someone's hurt, if someone has an accident, what's the first thing they should do? Aside from maybe, get medical treatment if they need it.
Ideally, but nobody thinks of it, and because they're hurt at the time. Yeah. But yes, other than getting to the doctor and getting medical attention right away, ideally, I'd love it if people could take photos of the area and capture, what happened to them then and there. But that's so rare. So ideally, you get a hold of an attorney as soon as you can. So whatever the situation, if you're dealing with snow, if you're dealing with product on the floor, if you're dealing with the configuration of a parking lot, I had a case once, where they had the curb stops in very odd places and somebody tripped over it. And in addition to the fact that the lights were completely out in the area, but I need to document that, if there's somebody around that also knew about it, any witnesses or neighbors or, friends or, you really need to document a slip and fall because the evidence can disappear quickly and you need to know who was there, who was responsible. So call your attorney right away if you're thinking of, if you're upset and you feel like it shouldn't have happened and it wasn't fair and you want to pursue a claim. You get a hold of an attorney immediately because evidence disappears quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense because, environments change and then all of a sudden you don't have the same things going on that might have caused the accident. What are some of the biggest challenges you face when handling these cases?
You're dealing with big corporate companies generally, whether you're dealing with a store or, the airport hangar. The biggest challenges is, I suppose, is that you're dealing with a giant corporation and they have more sort of power and attorney power. They're more aggressive. So that is probably the biggest challenge. And then sometimes trying to find the responsible party under certain circumstances. Usually that's not too difficult, but it can be. You can see there's a building owner, but somebody leased it, but maybe a company came in and did the cleaning and so sometimes pinning down the actual responsible party who was supposed to do what can be difficult. I mean, when you get into litigation, you'll have a couple of parties that you've sued and they're pointing the finger at each other. So that's maybe one of the challenges also.
When something like that happens where maybe the liability is either disputed or potentially unclear, how do you handle that?
I just keep going. I just keep marching forward. Right. I always know that there's that I always have a sense of like, this is wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And eventually we will get the correct party. We will get this handled. And, we'll just keep going until you understand that we mean business. Yeah.
You mentioned documentation, and it makes total sense in any case. But when you have limited documentation, when the evidence isn't necessarily like overwhelming, how difficult is it to prove these cases?
Well, right. If it isn't overwhelming and if you don't have great documentation, that can make it difficult. And that is one thing in this kind of world when you're doing not the personal injury, but the premises liability type cases, is that I have to explain to clients if it is really a more difficult or tougher case, here's your potential outcome, here's the cost to get here. And we have to sort of weigh that out. And they have to, I tell them very frankly that, they often discount the value of these. So what you think is the value is here at 100%, it will be discounted throughout this process because of these hurdles that we have to overcome because, maybe might be lacking some, documentary evidence or some aspect to it that just isn't, completely tightened up as much as we'd like.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned before that, one of the challenges is that you're often up against big corporations with a lot of attorneys and a lot of money and all that stuff. Are there strategies that you use to help strengthen a case or overcome some of the common defenses that come from property owners or insurance companies?
Well, again, if I have a really strong belief I won't take a case unless I have a fairly strong belief in it. And that just moves me forward. I just march forward and I feel very strongly about it. I've got plenty of experience. I've got plenty of trial experience. I'm not afraid to go to trial. It's just a weighing out of, again, here's your expected kind of outcome, your range of outcomes, here's the costs. And you have to sort of weigh that out with the clients as you go through it. But as far as I'm concerned, if I take the case, I believe in the case, and I just keep working. And I don't, I like to have a small practice, so I don't have, an overwhelming amount of clients. I have these clients, they're my clients, and I'm taking care of them. Their case is important to me, and I believe in them, and we're just going to keep going. And I have enough experience to know what to do.
You said earlier how you were on the defense side for a while before starting your own practice and working with the plaintiffs. How vital is the experience that you have on the defense side and the things that you learned to being able to be an effective attorney for the plaintiff?
Because I think that it helps in the sense that I do understand how it works internally, that, generally when they're producing reports and talking to their adjusters and the things that will move them, I know how that process works.
Mhm.
And I know what the attorneys are dealing with when they're talking to the adjusters and what's going to be important to them. And I also, have some understanding of their job and why they're making decisions or doing what they're doing. I just mentioned that because I've had plaintiffs' attorneys who've said to me, oh, they're doing this because of this. They'd never worked on the other side. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I've been in their position and I know why they're making these decisions. And I turned out to be right because I've done that job. So I think it's helpful. It's helpful in sometimes talking to counsel and bringing that up because, whenever you have something somewhat common with other people, it just makes it easier to have communication with them. And as a lawyer, communication is key. I mean, yes, we get into our battles, but generally, if you can communicate well with people and have a reasonable discussion, I think that you'll have better results.
How many of these cases would you say end up at trial versus how many settle beforehand?
I mean, I think the general rule out there in general is the cases that go to trial the most often have the highest percentage of going to trial are criminal law cases. In the civil law world, it's probably going to depend. Like I certainly did more cases on the trial side. I mean, on the defense side, not criminal defense, but insurance defense, because all my cases were in litigation, whereas now I have some cases in pre-litigation and post-litigation. But overall, I think the general rule is about 95% of cases settle. It's pretty high.
That is very, very high. Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense. I mean, no one wants to go to trial. So if you can get it figured out beforehand, that's obviously better for both parties.
Yeah. Trials, it's risky for everybody.
And time consuming and expensive and all those things. Yes.
All
right. Well, thanks to everyone for listening. To learn more about Ann Thoeny, visit ThoenyLaw.com. That's THOENY law.com. And of course, be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons and leave us a review in the comments. Ann, so great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.